January 17th, 1945. A cold, great dawn drapes the Ardennes in silence, broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the staccato rhythm of artillery. Mud clings to every surface, swallowing tracks as tanks inch forward over frozen fields. The air is sharp with smoke and the acrid bite of gunpowder. A column of German panzers moves cautiously, their steel hulls glinting under the weak winter sun. Inside, crews sit tensely, hands gripping controls, eyes scanning for the invisible threat that has already stalked them across Europe. Each man knows the stories. The Shermans that tear through armor with relentless precision, the Americans who seem to appear from nowhere and vanish again into smoke and trees. Then, a distant flash. The earth shakes. A shell slams into the lead panzer. Flames erupt, black smoke curling skyward. The metal groans, bending under the heat, while inside, the crew struggles in vain, trapped. Around them, comrades fire back. Yet the American tanks advance with chilling discipline, their guns precise, unstoppable. This is the moment when German armored crews first realize the war has changed, and survival is no longer guaranteed. By late 1944, the Third Reich was a shadow of its former self. The German army, once the unstoppable hammer of Blitzkrieg, was stretched across multiple fronts. In the east, Soviet forces pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. In the west, the Allies had broken out of Normandy, liberating Paris in August and moving steadily toward the German border. The once formidable panzer divisions were now thinner, their crews fatigued, and their logistical lines overextended. The Ardennes, a dense forested region along the Belgium-Luxembourg border, was chosen by Hitler for a counteroffensive, a desperate gamble aimed at splitting the Allied forces and regaining momentum. The terrain itself was unforgiving. Narrow roads, steep hills, and thick forests made maneuvering heavy armor difficult. Mud and winter frost slowed movement, turning armored columns into predictable targets for well-prepared defenders. American forces, having advanced hundreds of kilometers since the Normandy landings, were battle-hardened but weary. Infantry units had endured constant skirmishes, while armored divisions had faced numerous panzer counterattacks. Yet, despite exhaustion, the Americans possessed a crucial advantage: production and supply lines unmatched by Germany. Sherman tanks rolled off assembly lines in staggering numbers, each crew trained to coordinate with infantry, artillery, and air support in combined arms operations. The Sherman itself was not invincible. Its armor was lighter than the German Panther or Tiger tanks, and frontal engagements often favored German firepower. But in the hands of a coordinated American crew, the Sherman's 75mm or 76mm gun could exploit weaknesses in Panther and Panzer hulls. High-explosive rounds shredded tracks and immobilized vehicles, while concentrated fire from multiple tanks ensured no German tank could escape unscathed. Mobility and numbers became the Americans' true weapon, turning quantity into tactical superiority. German tank crews faced psychological as well as physical challenges. Years of continuous combat, insufficient replacements, and the growing realization that the Allies were inexorably advancing weighed heavily. Radio communications crackled with fear and confusion. Orders from higher command were often delayed or ignored, and the once unbreakable chain of discipline faltered under the stress of modern mechanized warfare. Crews entered battle knowing that if their tank was hit, chances of survival were slim. By November 1944, Allied intelligence had gathered detailed information on German positions, strengths, and likely maneuvers. Reconnaissance aircraft scouted forests and villages, while radio intercepts provided insight into German communications. The Americans adapted rapidly, creating ambushes and layered defenses that took full advantage of terrain and technology. In contrast, German forces, facing fuel shortages and mechanical failures, struggled to maintain a coherent defensive line. The human element cannot be understated. For German panzer crews, every engagement carried the heavy burden of fear and inevitability. Unlike the early campaigns of 1940 to 41, when tactical skill and surprise often determined the outcome, by late 1944, sheer firepower and coordinated American tactics dominated the battlefield. Crews clung to hope that skill and experience could compensate, yet they were increasingly confronted by the relentless logic of Allied production and strategy. Amid this tension, individual moments of heroism and terror occurred daily. German commanders attempted daring maneuvers to hold bridges or delay American advances. Small infantry units supported tanks with anti-tank weapons, trying to exploit every weakness in the Sherman formations. Yet the numerical and tactical advantage of the Americans slowly ground down resistance. The forested hills of the Ardennes, once a potential shield, became a killing ground where tanks could be isolated, encircled, and destroyed by combined arms. Every mile forward for the Americans revealed the widening cracks in German armor strategy. The contrast between the well-supplied, coordinated U.S. forces and the overextended, exhausted German divisions defined the late-war battlefield. It set the stage for encounters where American firepower did not just disable tanks. It ignited them, leaving crews trapped and terrified. These conditions were not accidents of war, but the cumulative result of production, planning, and adaptation, creating a lethal environment that the Panzer crews were increasingly unprepared to face. This backdrop of exhaustion, numerical superiority, and tactical adaptation explains why seemingly invincible German tanks could be overwhelmed. It also frames the human and technological angles that will define the coming battles. The same moments where Sherman firepower turned the tide and left German crews weeping amidst the flames. Connection to next section. The stage is now set for a deeper operational and tactical analysis. Section 2 of Context will explore specific U.S. units, Sherman capabilities, German defensive strategies, and the human experiences of tank crews on the front lines. As December 1944 approached, American forces prepared for winter operations in the Ardennes. The U.S. 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions, among others, were advancing steadily, their Sherman tanks supported by infantry, artillery, and air reconnaissance. Unlike the early campaigns of 1940 or 1941, these operations relied on precise coordination. Infantry would secure villages and roads, artillery would suppress enemy positions, and tanks would exploit breaches with speed and firepower. The Sherman tank, often underestimated by German crews, had evolved into a formidable weapon in skilled hands. The M4A3 variant, armed with a 75mm gun, could penetrate the side and rear armor of Panthers at reasonable ranges. Its relatively high speed allowed crews to maneuver into flanking positions, avoiding the lethal frontal guns of German tanks. Importantly, the Sherman's mechanical reliability and ease of repair meant that more tanks remained operational compared to their German counterparts, which suffered frequent mechanical breakdowns under harsh conditions. German armored units, in contrast, faced logistical and operational strain. Fuel shortages limited mobility, and spare parts were scarce. Panther and Tiger tanks, though superior in armor and firepower, were cumbersome and maintenance-intensive. In the Ardennes, forests and narrow roads often forced these tanks into predictable paths, making them vulnerable to ambushes and concentrated Sherman fire. Crew training, once elite, had suffered under attrition. Replacements were younger, less experienced, and often underprepared for the psychological pressures of facing overwhelming firepower. The human dimension of armored warfare became painfully clear during these engagements. German crews experienced fear in its most immediate form. The sudden flash of a Sherman shell impacting a Panther, the explosion of fuel tanks, and the encroaching smoke that turned metal into an oven. Radios crackled with frantic messages, and commanders had to make split-second decisions under extreme stress. Survival depended not just on tactical skill, but also on coordination, luck, and sometimes sheer instinct. For the Americans, coordination and discipline amplified their technological edge. Sherman crews drilled extensively in combined arms tactics, learning to communicate with infantry and artillery units seamlessly. Reconnaissance units identified enemy positions, and aerial observers adjusted artillery fire in real time. The result was a battlefield where individual skill was magnified by organization, allowing U.S. forces to systematically dismantle German armored formations. Weather compounded these challenges. December in the Ardennes brought freezing temperatures, fog, and heavy snowfall. Mud slowed tanks, obscured sight lines, and immobilized vehicles that could have otherwise maneuvered to safety. Despite these conditions, American forces adapted quickly, using terrain to their advantage and exploiting the vulnerabilities of German tanks. German commanders struggled to maintain formation and cohesion, often forcing panzers into frontal engagements where Shermans could target weak spots with devastating effect. The psychological impact on German crews cannot be overstated. Experienced veterans who had survived the Blitzkrieg and campaigns in France and the Soviet Union now found themselves trapped, exposed to fire they could neither predict nor fully counter. Letters and memoirs from the period describe a mix of disbelief and terror. The shock of seeing their heavily armored machines penetrated and ignited by what they had once considered inferior tanks. For many, the Ardennes was a turning point in the war where survival became a daily, uncertain gamble. Even on a macro scale, the operational consequences were profound. The loss of Panther and Panzer tanks reduced German capacity to counter Allied advances in subsequent engagements. Villages and crossroads, once secure points of defense, became kill zones. The synergy of American logistics, technology, and tactics created an environment where German armored units were increasingly at a disadvantage, unable to regroup or launch effective counterattacks. By the end of this period, the Ardennes offensive had exposed a critical reality. Sheer firepower, coordination, and industrial capacity could overcome even the most formidable German armored units. Sherman tanks, with their speed, numbers, and tactical use, were no longer just tools. They had become instruments of decisive battlefield psychology. They could strike fear, destroy morale, and force crews into untenable situations. This operational and human context directly leads to the multiple perspectives and angles of analysis that define the story. The tactical brilliance of U.S. commanders, the technological edge of Sherman firepower, and the psychological strain on German crews. Each angle reveals a different facet of why German tank crews wept as American firepower ignited their tanks, setting the stage for a deep exploration of human, technological, and moral dimensions. Angle 1. Human, fear, courage, and the weight of battle. Inside a Panther or Panzer, every second carried life or death stakes. German tank crews of late 1944 to 45 had faced countless engagements across Europe, yet the Ardennes presented a new level of peril. Unlike the early Blitzkrieg campaigns, where surprise and maneuver often dictated victory, here crews confronted a relentless combination of firepower, terrain, and exhaustion. The human experience inside these tanks was suffocating. Metal holes trapped men, with engines roaring and fires erupting nearby. Visibility was limited, and each flash from a distant Sherman shell could mean instant death. Crew members relied on training and instinct, yet panic could spread within seconds. Letters and diaries from surviving crews describe frozen hands, hearts hammering, and the horrifying awareness that the armor designed to protect them could fail at any moment. American crews, in contrast, worked in highly coordinated teams. Communication was precise, targets were identified and shared. While they faced their own dangers, German anti-tank fire, mines, and ambushes, the psychological burden was often mitigated by preparation and numbers. This human contrast underscores the growing disparity. One side increasingly confident, the other trapped in fear and uncertainty. The emotional toll extended beyond the battlefield. Survivors of destroyed tanks recount long-lasting trauma. Many Panzer crews were forced to abandon comrades. Witnessing the flames consume friends and equipment. This human suffering became inseparable from the technological and tactical dynamics that defined late-war armored engagements. Angle 2. Tactical coordination and battlefield mastery. Tactics in late 1944 had evolved dramatically. American armored units no longer relied solely on frontal assaults. They implemented combined arms doctrine to devastating effect. Infantry, artillery, and air reconnaissance worked in concert with Shermans to identify, isolate, and destroy German tanks. Ambushes became a common strategy. Sherman units would conceal themselves along forest edges or behind hills, waiting for German columns to pass. Once the enemy entered the kill zone, coordinated fire from multiple tanks could disable the lead vehicle, block retreat, and systematically destroy the formation. Artillery fire, adjusted by forward observers, would further confound the German crews. German commanders attempted to counter these tactics with flanking maneuvers and defensive positioning, but limitations in fuel, mechanical reliability, and communication often rendered these efforts insufficient. The tactical advantage of American forces was amplified by superior numbers, mobility, and intelligence. Every engagement became a test of coordination, where a single misstep could leave a Panther or Panzer exposed to multiple Sherman guns. The effectiveness of these tactics was not abstract. It manifested in battlefield outcomes. Entire German armored units were immobilized or destroyed in rapid sequences, and even elite crews found themselves trapped, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed. This tactical reality sets the stage for the technological examination of firepower that made such maneuvers lethal. Angle 3. Technological, Sherman firepower versus German armor. Technology defined the decisive moments in the Ardennes. The Sherman tank, while not as heavily armored as a Panther or Tiger, leveraged speed, maneuverability, and effective ammunition to exploit vulnerabilities. The 75mm gun could penetrate side or rear armor, while the 76mm variant improved anti-tank performance significantly. High explosive rounds could damage tracks and immobilize vehicles, leaving crews sitting targets for concentrated fire. German tanks were engineering marvels in many respects. The Panther's long-barrel 75mm gun and sloped armor allowed it to dominate frontal engagements in ideal conditions. Tigers, with their 88mm guns, could destroy Shermans at great distances. Yet, these advantages were mitigated by mechanical complexity, slow maneuverability, and vulnerability to flanking attacks. Fuel and maintenance shortages further eroded operational effectiveness. The result was a technological paradox. Superior German tanks increasingly fell to inferior Shermans, not because of individual weakness, but because American crews optimized their tanks' advantages in coordinated tactical engagements. Sherman firepower became more than metal and explosives. It was a force multiplier, transforming numbers, positioning, and timing into lethal precision. This technological edge also had a human consequence. German crews, confident in the armor that had carried them through France, Belgium, and the Eastern Front, were now confronted by their own vulnerability. Tanks that had once been nearly invincible could be ignited, trapped, and destroyed, leaving crews exposed to fire and smoke. The technological disparity, therefore, was inseparable from the psychological trauma and tactical outcomes on the battlefield. Angle 4. Leadership decisions under fire. Leadership on both sides played a decisive role in the outcome of armored engagements. American commanders, from division generals to tank platoon leaders, emphasized coordination, preparation, and adaptability. Orders were clear, and subordinate officers had the autonomy to exploit weaknesses in German formations. Leaders constantly monitored intelligence, adjusted artillery, and synchronized infantry movements with Sherman tank maneuvers. In contrast, German leadership faced nearly insurmountable challenges. Hitler's strategic insistence on counteroffensives, coupled with depleted resources, forced commanders into impossible situations. Many Panzer leaders sought to defend territory or conduct delaying actions, but logistical constraints, mechanical failures, and overwhelming enemy numbers often rendered these efforts futile. Decisions made under pressure, whether to advance, hold, or retreat, carried immediate life-or-death consequences for their crews. The disparity in leadership style and operational flexibility magnified the effectiveness of American tactics. While a single Sherman crew could exploit terrain and firepower to maximum effect, German commanders often struggled to coordinate units under attack. The result: units became isolated, panzers were ambushed, and leadership's inability to adapt under fire contributed directly to catastrophic losses. Angle 5. Enemy perspective, German adaptation and struggle. From the German viewpoint, the Ardennes represented both opportunity and desperation. Commanders hoped to replicate earlier successes through speed, surprise, and concentrated armored strikes. Yet American forces, anticipating German tactics, countered with layered defenses and superior numbers. German crews attempted flanking maneuvers, night attacks, and anti-tank ambushes, but these tactics were increasingly ineffective. Fuel shortages limited mobility, mechanical breakdowns left tanks stranded, and inexperienced crews could not execute complex maneuvers under fire. Even elite units, like the remnants of the 2nd Panzer Division, found themselves overwhelmed. The enemy perspective also highlights the psychological toll. Reports and memoirs describe the despair of seeing comrades' tanks ignited by Sherman fire. Fear was compounded by the realization that German engineering and firepower could no longer guarantee survival. Adaptation was attempted, but the strategic environment, relentless Allied pressure, winter conditions, and industrial superiority left little room for recovery. Angle 6. Moral and psychological. The cost of armored warfare. The human cost of these engagements extended far beyond casualties. Tank crews, trapped in burning panzers, faced a harrowing confrontation with mortality. Survivors recount the disorienting mix of smoke, fire, and the screams of comrades. Even for American crews, witnessing destruction on such a scale left lasting psychological scars. Moral questions emerged on the battlefield. How to weigh the necessity of firepower against the human suffering it inflicted. Sherman tanks, though effective, turned warfare into a mechanized crucible where decisions had immediate, lethal consequences. The psychological burden on German crews was compounded by exhaustion and the knowledge that survival often hinged on factors beyond skill or courage. This moral dimension reinforces the larger narrative. Armored warfare was no longer merely about numbers or technology. It was about human endurance under extreme conditions. Fear, bravery, and trauma intertwined with strategic and tactical realities, shaping how soldiers experienced war and how history remembers these battles. Connection to next section. With these 6 angles explored, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and moral/psychological, we have a comprehensive understanding of the forces, decisions, and experiences that led to decisive moments on the battlefield. The narrative now naturally progresses into the climax/turning point, where these elements converge in intense, high-stakes engagements. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes winter had settled into a bone-chilling fog. German forces launched their surprise counteroffensive, intending to split the Allied front and seize critical supply hubs. Columns of Panthers and Panzers moved cautiously through narrow forest roads, each engine rumble swallowed by the dense trees. The Americans were ready. Every hill, village, and crossroad had been scouted. Sherman tanks lay in ambush, their crews tense, eyes scanning through periscopes and rangefinders. The first exchange was devastating. A lead Panther, attempting to cross a frozen field, was struck by a well-aimed 75mm shell from a concealed Sherman. The impact ignited fuel and ammunition inside, turning the tank into a furnace. The crew fought to escape, but thick smoke and flames sealed their fate. Behind them, another Panzer advanced, only to find itself flanked by 2 Sherman guns firing in unison. Within minutes, the column was immobilized. German crews, experienced in years of armored warfare, were now confronted by a relentless, coordinated assault they could neither outmaneuver nor outgun. The battle escalated along multiple fronts. In the village of Clairvaux, Sherman tanks fired from concealed positions while infantry units swept through streets, neutralizing anti-tank teams. Artillery observers adjusted fire onto German supply points, cutting off reinforcements. Every German advance met precise, overlapping American fire. Panthers and Panzers that had once dominated the battlefield now became trap targets, their crews helpless against concentrated barges. Mechanical failures compounded the carnage. Slopes and mud immobilized tigers, leaving them exposed. Sherman crews exploited these vulnerabilities ruthlessly. Tanks moved in tandem, firing from multiple angles to overwhelm armor and destroy tracks. Explosions ripped through hulls, flames consuming metal as trapped crews struggled to survive. Some tried to escape through hatches, only to be caught in the inferno of secondary explosions. Commanders on both sides observed these moments with mounting tension. American leaders coordinated attacks with near-choreographed precision, exploiting terrain and timing. German officers attempted counterattacks, repositioning remaining tanks and coordinating infantry, but each action was met with superior numbers and firepower. The battlefield became a deadly chessboard, where one misstep could cost an entire crew. Even the forests, once seen as a shield for German movement, became lethal. Concealed Shermans waited behind trees, firing as German tanks entered kill zones. Anti-tank mines and obstacles slowed movement, creating choke points. German commanders' attempts to adapt were thwarted at every turn by the combination of terrain, tactics, and the Americans' technological edge. Amid the chaos, individual moments of heroism occurred. American tank crews risked exposure to draw fire, enabling flanking units to strike. Infantry advanced under heavy fire to neutralize machine gun nests. German crews, despite fear and exhaustion, tried desperate maneuvers, backing, sidestepping, even attempting to ram Shermans. But the sheer coordination of American firepower left little room for success. By the end of the day, the result was unmistakable. German armored units were shattered, many tanks destroyed or abandoned, and crews either dead, captured, or trapped in burning vehicles. The tactical combination of Sherman mobility, firepower, and coordinated infantry and artillery support had decisively neutralized the threat of even the most elite panzer divisions. This convergence of human courage, tactical mastery, and technological advantage marked the turning point in the Ardennes campaign. The battlefield was no longer defined by the strength of individual tanks, but by the orchestrated power of coordinated forces. The intense engagements left German crews weeping as American firepower ignited their tanks, a phrase that would come to symbolize the brutal efficiency and human cost of late-war armored warfare. By December 18, 1944, the Ardennes battlefield had become a chaotic labyrinth of burning metal, shattered forests, and frozen mud. German armored units, battered and exhausted, struggled to maintain formation. Panthers and Panzers, once symbols of dominance, were now scattered, immobilized, and vulnerable. American Sherman crews pressed relentlessly, exploiting every weakness with precision and coordination. At the village of Houffalize, a Panther battalion attempted to hold a key crossroads. Sherman tanks, positioned on concealed ridgelines, opened fire simultaneously. The first shell struck a Panther's side, igniting fuel and ammunition. The explosion reverberated through the forest, signaling the beginning of a systematic annihilation. Within minutes, multiple German tanks were ablaze, their crews trapped inside, while infantry and artillery suppressed any attempts at counterattack. Elsewhere, along the icy roads near Bastogne, Sherman units employed flanking tactics to devastating effect. German Tigers, constrained by snow and narrow lanes, became easy targets. Artillery observers coordinated with tank commanders, creating kill zones where one Panther or Tiger could be surrounded and destroyed within minutes. The disciplined execution of combined arms tactics turned terrain itself into a weapon, leaving German crews exposed and overwhelmed. Mechanical failure and logistical strain amplified the devastation. Fuel shortages forced panzers to halt mid-advance, while broken tracks or engine problems left others stranded. Sherman crews capitalized on these vulnerabilities, attacking immobilized tanks with high-explosive shells. Flames erupted, smoke filled the air, and the screams of trapped crews echoed through the cold forest. German officers attempted desperate measures, repositioning remaining tanks, ordering infantry to support armored units. But each effort was met by relentless American fire. The intensity of the fighting created moments of stark human drama. Survivors describe crews huddled inside burning tanks, fighting for survival while their comrades were annihilated just meters away. Sherman crews, aware of the destruction they inflicted, maneuvered carefully to avoid friendly fire. Yet each successful hit left a lasting psychological imprint. Commanders on both sides observed these moments with acute awareness. The battlefield was no longer defined by strategy alone, but by split-second decisions, coordination, and sheer firepower. By December 19th, the culmination of these engagements became clear. German armored resistance was effectively broken. Entire units were destroyed or forced into retreat, leaving villages, crossroads, and forests in American hands. Sherman crews, operating with remarkable precision and discipline, had neutralized even the most formidable panzer formations. The battlefield was littered with burning tanks, abandoned equipment, and the remnants of shattered morale. The decisive nature of these engagements underscored the transformation of armored warfare. No longer was a single heavy tank enough to dominate the battlefield. Instead, the integration of mobility, firepower, coordination, and tactical intelligence created a system in which German panzers, despite superior armor and guns, were rendered vulnerable. Every Sherman shell, every flanking maneuver, and every coordinated strike contributed to a turning point that would influence the remainder of the war on the Western Front. The destruction of German armored units also revealed the human cost of mechanized warfare. The image of crews trapped in burning tanks, fighting desperately to survive, became a haunting symbol of the Ardennes campaign. Letters, reports, and memoirs from the period recount the terror, the confusion, and the fleeting moments of heroism amidst overwhelming odds. For the Americans, the victory was tactical, but it also carried the weight of witnessing the destructive efficiency of their own firepower. By the end of the Ardennes engagements, the operational and psychological balance of armored warfare had shifted irreversibly. Sherman tanks, backed by coordinated infantry, artillery, and intelligence, had proven capable of overwhelming even the elite panzer divisions. German forces, despite bravery, tactical skill, and superior engineering in individual tanks, could not withstand the combined might of American firepower and operational mastery. The battlefield, scarred and silent once the smoke cleared, stood as a testament to this decisive transformation. The Ardennes battlefield, once alive with movement and fire, now lay silent under a gray winter sky. Burned-out tanks, twisted metal, and smoldering wreckage marked the devastating toll of the American advance. Entire German armored units had been destroyed or rendered inoperative, while infantry formations were fragmented and demoralized. Estimates from U.S. Army records indicate that thousands of German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, and dozens of Panthers and Panzers were lost in just a few days of combat. American losses were far lower, a testament to coordinated tactics, superior numbers, and the Sherman tank's reliability. Despite facing the technically superior Panther and Tiger tanks, U.S. armor divisions maintained cohesion, minimized casualties, and sustained momentum. The combination of mobility, firepower, and intelligence-driven operations allowed American forces to secure critical terrain, including crossroads, villages, and forested areas, which had been central to German defensive plans. Strategically, the destruction of German armor in the Ardennes had immediate consequences. Hitler's counteroffensive, designed to split the Allied front and reclaim initiative, collapsed. German forces were forced into retreat, abandoning territory and supplies. The failure drained an already overextended army, leaving divisions incapable of mounting further large-scale operations. The Western Front was now firmly in Allied hands, setting the stage for the push into Germany in early 1945. Beyond the numbers and territory, the psychological impact on German forces was profound. Crews who survived the destruction of their tanks carried deep scars, both physical and emotional. Memoirs and after-action reports describe the shock of seeing armored vehicles, previously considered nearly invincible, reduced to burning hulks by coordinated Sherman fire. Fear and fatigue compounded the challenges of reorganizing units, and morale across panzer divisions plummeted. For many soldiers, the Ardennes marked the final shattering of confidence in Germany's armored superiority. The American perspective, by contrast, was shaped by a combination of achievement and sobering awareness. Commanders recognized the effectiveness of tactics and technology, but they also witnessed the human cost of mechanized warfare firsthand. Sherman crews had executed operations with precision, yet the scenes of burning tanks and casualties reinforced the Sherman crews had executed operations with precision, yet the scenes of burning tanks and casualties reinforced the brutal realities of armored combat. Reports emphasized not just victory, but also the efficiency and lethality of modern firepower, a lesson that would influence subsequent operations in Germany. Logistical and technological consequences were equally significant. The loss of German armor and fuel supplies created a widening operational gap, reducing the ability of panzer divisions to resist subsequent advances. For the Americans, the combination of well-maintained Sherman tanks, abundant ammunition, and cohesive support units ensured that operational momentum could be sustained. These material realities, paired with battlefield experience, further cemented Allied superiority in armored warfare. The Ardennes aftermath also reshaped tactical thinking for both sides. German units were forced to reconsider defensive strategies, emphasizing dispersion, concealment, and improvisation to counter Allied firepower. American commanders, meanwhile, refined combined arms coordination, integrating lessons from the winter battles into future operations. The battlefield had become a proving ground for the effectiveness of modern mechanized warfare, where coordination, firepower, and tactical intelligence outweighed raw armor quality alone. As the smoke cleared, the Ardennes stood as a stark testament to the devastating intersection of technology, human endurance, and strategy. German armor divisions were weakened beyond repair, and Sherman crews had demonstrated the lethal potential of disciplined, coordinated firepower. Yet amid the victory, the human cost remained visible. Burned-out tanks, the remnants of panzer formations, and the stories of crews trapped in flames, all symbols of a war fought with both precision and merciless intensity. Connection to next section. With immediate consequences, strategic shifts, and battlefield destruction established, we now transition to Aftermath, Section 2, examining long-term effects, official reports, and broader implications for German and American forces as the war moved toward its conclusion. The aftermath of the Ardennes offensive left German forces in disarray. Panzer divisions, once symbols of armored might, were severely depleted. By mid-January 1945, official Wehrmacht records noted losses of over 600 tanks, including Panthers and Panzers, with many more rendered inoperable due to mechanical failure or battlefield damage. The destruction was compounded by the loss of trained crews, many of whom were killed, captured, or psychologically broken by the intensity of combat. Strategically, the failed counteroffensive had immediate repercussions. Hitler's hopes of splitting the Allied front and recapturing Antwerp evaporated. The collapse of armored units forced a defensive posture, and German forces were compelled to withdraw across the Rhine and reorganize under severe pressure. The Ardennes highlighted the limits of German operational capacity. No matter the quality of individual tanks, logistics, numbers, and sustained firepower dictated the outcome. The offensive became a last, desperate gamble rather than a decisive maneuver. For the Americans, The Ardennes campaign reinforced the effectiveness of industrialized, coordinated warfare. Sherman tanks, though individually less powerful than Panthers or Tigers, demonstrated the power of combined arms doctrine when paired with infantry, artillery, and intelligence support. The ability to mass firepower, coordinate ambushes, and sustain operational tempo showcased the transformative advantage of American production capacity and training. It was a lesson not only in technology, but in strategic application. The psychological and moral effects on both sides were equally significant. German crews, forced to confront the reality that even the most formidable tanks could be destroyed with precision, suffered a profound morale collapse. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal lingering trauma, fear of entrapment, helplessness in the face of coordinated fire, and the despair of seeing comrades immolated. For many, the Ardennes represented the moment when armored invincibility, a cornerstone of German military doctrine, was shattered. American crews, while victorious, carried their own awareness of war's human cost. The sight of burning German tanks, the desperate struggles of crews inside, and the destruction of entire units left a lasting impression. Commanders documented these experiences in after-action reports, noting both the efficiency of combined operations and the psychological impact of mechanized destruction. The lessons learned here informed subsequent operations, ensuring that firepower and coordination would continue to dictate battlefield outcomes. The long-term consequences of the Ardennes also reshaped post-war armor doctrine. Military analysts observed that quality of armor alone could no longer guarantee battlefield success. Flexibility, coordination, intelligence, and sustainable logistics were equally, if not more, critical. Sherman tanks, often derided for their lighter armor, became case studies in how mobility, numbers, and tactical application could neutralize technically superior opponents. This realization would influence armor development and strategy well beyond World War II. Finally, the Ardennes demonstrated the human dimension of mechanized warfare. Even as tanks were reduced to burning hulks, the experiences of the crews, fear, courage, improvisation, and survival, provided a stark reminder that behind every machine was a human life subject to chaos and mortality. The battlefield, scarred and littered with destruction, stood as a historical testament. Technological superiority and coordination could decide outcomes, but the cost was measured in both human and material terms. By the time the Ardennes offensive ended, the German army's ability to conduct large-scale armored operations was effectively crippled. American forces emerged not only tactically victorious, but also strategically poised to press into Germany, accelerating the final collapse of the Third Reich. The Ardennes campaign and the decimation of German armor within it became a defining moment, a turning point where the combined weight of human endurance, tactical innovation, and technological application reshaped the outcome of the Western Front. The Ardennes campaign revealed a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Sheer courage and engineering alone could not overcome coordination, adaptability, and the relentless logic of industrialized firepower. German Panzer crews, once the elite of armored combat, faced a battlefield transformed by technology, tactics, and human resilience. Their tanks, symbols of invincibility, could be reduced to burning hulks within moments, leaving men trapped, terrified, and forced to confront the limits of both machine and flesh. American forces, by contrast, exemplified the synthesis of human skill and mechanized innovation. Sherman tanks, when combined with infantry, artillery, and intelligence, became more than weapons. They were instruments of decisive action, capable of reshaping the battlefield with precision and relentless pressure. The human element was as vital as the technological. Disciplined crews, trained to exploit opportunity and minimize risk, turned numbers and strategy into a force multiplier. The Ardennes also illuminates the enduring cost of war. Each destroyed tank, each trapped crew, serves as a reminder that mechanized warfare is measured not only in territory gained or lost, but in the lives suspended within steel and flame. The emotional weight carried by survivors, fear, courage, and trauma, lingers as a testimony to the human experience behind every statistic and report. Historically, these events marked a turning point. German armored might, once feared across Europe, was irreversibly weakened. The Western Front now tilted decisively in favor of the Allies, setting the stage for the final advance into Germany. The campaign demonstrated that success in war is not dictated by single elements, armor, guns, or raw skill, but by the interplay of coordination, technology, logistics, and human resolve. In the end, the Ardennes is more than a battlefield. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and the brutal clarity of modern combat. German crews wept as their tanks ignited, not out of failure of spirit, but because they confronted a new reality. In war, survival and victory are determined as much by the system around a soldier as by the soldier himself. And from that crucible, history learned an enduring lesson about the human and mechanical cost of industrialized warfare.